We're live. Well, it's good morning from San Diego here, but good evening in Denmark, right?
Yeah.
Afternoon
Welcome,
here.
everyone. Yeah, an afternoon in Tennessee. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our live with Dr. Lise Hansen. We are very, very excited for today's topic. If you haven't joined our live before, my name's Ruby. I am the founder of Real Dog, and we make a monthly box of air-dried treats and chews, whole food supplements. And I'm joined by Kay, who is our lead instructor at the Feed Real Institute. She teaches our DIY workshops and also our nutrition courses. And we are joined by Dr. Lise Hansen, who is a homeopathic veterinary surgeon, joining us from Denmark today, right?
Yay.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking today about spaying and neutering, which is a big topic. I think particularly here in the US, because it is a routine procedure, which where you're located, Dr. Hansen, is not anymore. Isn't that right?
Yes, I mean it's one of the really interesting aspects of this topic. I think that there's such enormous geographical differences. In Norway, spaying and neutering dogs is illegal. In Sweden, it's not illegal, but it's considered unethical and it's very rarely done. So in parts of Scandinavia, at least, it's very unusual for a dog not to be hormonally entire. In Denmark, where I am, it's just under half of dogs are neutered. So it's not an uncommon procedure, but most are left intact. In the UK, about 70% of dogs are neutered still, something that hasn't changed in recent years, which is a bit startling, which is partly why we're having this conversation. But I know that where you are, having a dog that's not neutered is unusual. And as I understand it, almost frowned upon.
Sure,
Absolutely.
yeah, no, it's unusual. And even we kept our male intact for the last 8 years and got comments all the time. You know, he's a big dog, so from the back there, you kind of see and you're like, oh. And so, yes, frowned upon. And I think the thought is that as Americans, we're not able to manage having an intact dog, which is just completely different than other parts of the world. For everyone that's joining in right now, we're going to be talking about spay and neutering. And for all of our lives, we save and repost. So if you have a burning question that you want to ask, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I'm also curious for everyone that is viewing right now, tell us where you're located and what the laws about spay and neutering look like. It looks like Susanna says it's more common in Sweden now to probably have a intact dog, male or female. I would love to know where you guys are located and sort of gear this conversation towards you and any questions you might have about spaying and neutering.
I have an intact female, and we deal with her, semi-annual bleeds, and you just deal with it. And she's 7, so
yeah. And there's a conversation to be had about, do we keep them intact forever? Is there a particular age? But we'll get into all of that. Dr. Hansen, can you kind of just give us a brief background about your journey to practice homeopathy and alternative medicine? How did you get to where you are?
Sure. I mean, I've been a small animal veterinarian for exactly 30 years. And for all of that time, I'm obviously from Denmark and I'm in Denmark now, but throughout those 30 years of practice, I've been dividing my practice in one way or another, between working in the UK and working in Denmark. But I think as someone who's been in this field for a very long time, I can honestly say there has never been a more exciting time to be into dogs than right now. I mean, the last decade or less even has provided so much new information. Study after study has been coming out. All this information has been made available to us that has really enabled us to look after our dogs so much better. The depth of understanding in this whole area of how to look after dogs is just so different from how it was 5 or 10 years ago. I think certainly for me as a vet, my focus has maybe not shifted, but expanded in the last decade from not just being about making ill animals better, but also about preventative healthcare, and how can we look after our dogs in a way that supports their health and try to prevent them developing diseases. And I think, I keep saying this, but I think there are 4 areas that are really important, and that everybody who cares for a dog, whether they're aware of making these decisions or not, everyone who's in charge of a dog's health will be making choices about 4 important areas: diet, as you know all about, vaccination, parasite control, and neutering. Even if your dog is completely healthy, even if you're not even, sitting down to consciously make these decisions, you are making choices. And I think it's really important that these choices are made based on scientific facts and not just on some half-conscious, I don't know, sense of habit, or, what this is what I've always done. And that goes for all of us, breeders, dog carers, veterinarians. We need to constantly follow the science, and we need to constantly update our practices. We can't just do what we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So even someone who's very confident in their, an experienced vet or an experienced breeder, or someone who's had dogs all their lives, if they're doing things today the way they did things 10 years ago, they really need to update their insights, because what we thought we knew, what we thought was correct 10 years ago has just turned out not to be the case in all of those 4 areas. I mean, it's really a quantum leap that we've made in just a few years, really, in terms of understanding the consequences of some of these actions. And paradoxically also, some of the things that turn out to be really harmful are the things that are done with the best intentions. It's not neglect. It's really people who are putting in time and energy and money trying to do the right thing, who inadvertently may end up harming their animals. So it's really important, I think, that we talk about these things and, get all this new information out there.
Sure,
and in terms,
sure.
And I mean, in terms of neutering, which is the topic for today, what we know about neutering really, well, the change began at least exactly 10 years ago with a study that came out from University of California in 2013, often referred to as the Golden Retriever study, where they looked at the lifelong health records of 700 and something, I think, Golden Retrievers, and looked for factors that had influenced their health and their longevity. And they found that neutered dogs, male and female, had a significantly higher risk of developing osteoarthritis, ligament disease, and cancers. And this was just mind-blowing. This was
Is
one of
that
those
across
studies.
the board, or was it neutered at a certain age?
No, this was across the board. And I think all we can really say is that there are still a lot of unknowns. I mean, that prior to 2013, prior to that study, the general consensus seemed to have been that, well, to be honest, I don't think many vets gave it that much thought. Most of us were taught, well, all of us probably were taught at vet school that it's best to neuter. We were taught that it's best to neuter because it's easier, and there's an element of population control, and it prevents mammary tumors in females. It turns out, and then I don't think anyone really looked at it very much. We just kept repeating what we'd heard and what we heard everybody else repeat, and that was kind of the going answer to the question about whether or not to neuter. And then came the study in 2013, and suddenly everybody thought, what? And everybody started looking at neutering and looking at the research that was available. And it turns out that the advice that we were all repeating came from one study that was done, I can't remember now, in the 50s or the 60s. And it was done to a standard that would be, never get published anywhere today. So it was something that should be completely ignored. It's just that nobody had really looked at it after that. So
sure. What was,
go on.
I'm just sorry. I have so many questions.
Yeah.
So before that study from the University of California came out, and I think you were just getting into it right now, what were the standards that that study was based on that wouldn't have been credible now?
Well, it was one small, poorly conducted study. And because it was what was available, it's what everybody was repeating. But after 2013, when suddenly, you know, someone turned the spotlight onto the topic of neutering, a frenzy of studies came out. And everybody was looking at neutering. I went at a World Small Animal Veterinary Association conference in 17, I think, and it was like they were holding out these studies left, right, and center, and they were all, you know, still hot from the press because it was such a hot topic. And there's been so many studies that have happened in the last 10 years. And I mean, before 2013, it is really a matter of before and after 2013, so to speak. Before then, we knew that neutering could have side effects, but we thought they were limited to coat changes, with a, you know, puppy coat, like a cosmetic problem. A tendency for neutered animals to gain weight, and a risk of urinary incontinence in neutered female dogs. And that was pretty much it. And the consensus was that the advantages outweigh the risk. So it wasn't really a problem. But
and the advantage was specifically in controlling dog population?
I think that's where the geographical differences come in, that in some countries, like most of Scandinavia, neutering wasn't really done as a routine measure. And in some places like America, it was done routinely. I think it was more a matter of, I don't know, historical anecdotes, you know, habit, what cultural bias wherever you were, but it wasn't considered a huge health issue. It was there were some risks, but there were some benefits, and it depended on where you lived, really, what your vet would recommend or what you would be doing. But what this study showed, or I should say, the combined studies sparked by this initial study in 2013, what has emerged is significant health risks that involved with neutering. And really, it shouldn't be done as a routine measure. I should say there's two main points I should say from the outset. One is I'm talking about routine neutering of, well, typically young dogs, but obviously there can be health reasons. You know, if your male dog has a testicular tumor, or if if your dog suffers from something that flares up whenever she's in season, then there may well be medical reasons for neutering. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about routine neutering for no particular reason, which is what has been the way in some parts of the world. We just do it because we've always done it, and that's what we need to get away from.
Can I interject for a minute?
Yep.
What do you have any idea what triggered veterinarians to say we should do it before 4 months of age? I mean, that's when it really shocked me. Like, why would we do such early age spay neuters?
I think that's it's down to cultural differences. Okay. It's not down to science. There's no scientific evidence supporting that at all. In Denmark and in the UK, for quite a while, we've said, let them have their first season and do it then. But what I would say today, based on what any informed advice today would be, we shouldn't be talking about when. We shouldn't do it unless there's a particular reason for that individual why it must be done. It's not a matter of when to do it. It's a matter of why should we? You know, you need a really good reason to do it.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is a lot of the laws in the U.S. actually say any dog over the age of 4 months should be neutered.
When you say law, you mean
actual laws within, and it's not usually within states, it's within counties of the state or cities of the state. They will actually state after 4 months of age, we expect those dogs to be neutered. And then,
so what if they're not?
In Los Angeles, I pulled that up before we came on. There's actual fines. And the first time you're caught with a dog, it's $100 fine and 40 hours of community service. If you get caught again, it's $500 fine and 180 or something. I don't remember. hours of I mean, it's ridiculous unless you have a veterinarian write off that you have a reason for your dog not being neutered. And in the state of Tennessee, where I am, every dog that comes out of a shelter has to be spayed or neutered. And they have incentives. Your dog license is cheaper if your dog's neutered, you know, that kind of thing. So it is very, very, and you're shamed if you don't. Like, you are a bad pet owner if your dog isn't neutered.
I knew that it was, you know, the public opinion was, I know that you've had this mantra drilled into you for decades, haven't you? That you must spay and neuter. Responsible dog ownership means you must spay and neuter.
Right.
I mean, as a for someone in Scandinavia, that's bizarre in itself. But I didn't know that it extended to rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the comments here, Dolce's Legacy, says, I have seen where they will actually confiscate the animal, which is insane. It's insane. And so what that's doing is discouraging us from ever registering our animal with the county, or if for whatever reason your dog gets out and the animal services or humane society picks them up, they may bring them back to the shelter and go ahead and neuter them. I know they administer rabies vaccines without permission in order for you to, even if the dog has already gotten that vaccine, if there's just they don't have a record of it because you haven't registered that dog with the county, they'll go ahead and do that just because they want to.
So there's a job to do there. There's some work that needs to be done. I mean,
that's why you're on today.
Sure, but I mean, there must be. Maybe that's what you've got, or maybe that's you guys. But there must be a movement to change this. I mean, the vets where you are. I mean, the science that I've got in front of me is also available to them. It's new, and I know that change takes time. But the science currently available to us is very clear that neutering is harmful. And I think, I mean, the 2 points that I always like to just clarify from the outset, one, we did already, that we're talking about routine neutering, not neutering for health reasons.
Right.
The other is that when I think this topic really has to be separated from the topic of population control. You know, I'm not talking about population control. I'm taking responsible dog ownership as a given. You know, I'm assuming that the person who has a dog is able to look after a dog. What I'm talking about is the health implication for each individual dog if they are neutered. And it's very clear that they will be less healthy for it, you know.
Right.
And I think that has to be the center of this conversation. If you can't have an entire dog, you shouldn't have a dog at all. And I know that shelters have historically, I mean, they've been the ones to promote, neutering, and from the best of, you know, it comes from a good place.
Right.
It comes from a love of dogs. But we just need to spread this newer information, and we need to change the way we used to do things.
That's right. And there are consequences for that. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think we've seen that big of a difference in the number of animals that are euthanized every year. I mean, there's been some decline, but not enough to account for what we're doing to our dogs.
No, absolutely. So. And I mean, I really do think you have to assume that the dog is in a good home with a responsible owner that can look after them. And then when they ask the question, what's the best thing to do for my dog? The answer is very clearly that it's best to leave them intact. They will be healthier for it. And another important point is that it's not, there's no urgency to make this decision. You know, if you've had this hammered into you forever, you must spay and neuter, and I think that is particularly where you are. Absolutely. That it can be quite daunting for someone to decide not to. It doesn't have to be a huge decision. You can just say, well, I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to see what the first season is like, and then I'm going to see what the second season is like, and then you find out that, well, you know, it's not a big deal.
Right.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is veterinarians are the trusted authority. So you bring home a dog, the first place you go is to a vet to tell you all the things that you need to know. Right. And there's so much pressure from that veterinarian, perhaps because of their schooling or whatever they learned, that it feels like there isn't a choice. But I think we're in a time now where we have empowered pet owners who are asking questions. They're
Mhm.
coming onto these lives and learning more things so that they go back to their vet and they're saying, I heard there was a study that says we're doing more harm than good by early spay and neutering, or just neutering generally,
Right.
forcing their veterinarian to go back and say, well, let me go look at that study, right? That's the hope.
Yeah. And it's
That's
not
the
even
hope.
one study, it's dozens of studies.
Now
I
it
mean,
is,
I mean,
yes.
I mean, this is what I mean about these exciting times that we're in, really, because whereas 15 years ago, you might have had a gut feeling, this can't be right. But today, this science is easily available. So if you want to vaccinate optimally, or you want to feed optimally, or you want to, you know, all these decisions, it's not difficult to come up with a list of references saying, well, you know, this is what the experts are saying.
Mhm.
So it shouldn't be a difficult argument. It's just that change takes time, and we're all there is a tendency to, I don't know, we cling to our convictions. I think it's just a human thing.
Mhm.
This is what I've always been told. You can't suddenly come here and tell me something different. But if we didn't evolve with science, the earth would still be flat. You know, we've got to take new
Good
information
point.
into account. I think there's also an element that, you know, we know now that neutering increases the risk of cancer, the risk of osteoarthritis, the risk of ligament disease, you know, knee problems, cruciate ruptures, the risk of thyroid disease. I mean, hypothyroidism, neutering is the single biggest risk factor for hypothyroidism. That's crazy. That's such a common condition. There are so many dogs that have to take medication every day for the rest of their life for hypothyroidism, who would not have had this condition had they not been neutered. We just didn't know. And that's really my point here. I think part of the reluctance is for vets and dog owners that, but I've always done that. And if it's harmful, I've caused harm. You know, it's most small animal vets will probably have neutered a dog every day of their working life. So if you suddenly have to realize that lots of those dogs would have later died from cancers or you know, suffered from other painful and chronic illness that may have been caused from that procedure that you recommended and carried out, that's not an easy situation to be in, and it may account for some of that kind of knee-jerk reluctance or tendency to dismiss new information, but it is there. You know, it can't be dismissed. So
yeah, that's the admittance that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Had you performed spays and neuters
early
on in your career?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think most vets do that on a daily basis. And I mean, 10 years ago, I had no idea it was harmful. 3 years ago, I had no idea of the mechanisms behind why it's harmful. You know, this is new information. So I think, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt, even where you are, I will bet anything. In 5 years, if you take your puppy to the vet, they're not going to pressure you to neuter it. You know, this is new information. It's not really a matter, but it's not a matter of differing opinions. It's a matter of we didn't used to know any better. How could we? The information was not available 10 years ago. It really wasn't. So we can't blame ourselves for acting on the information that was available to us. But the flip side of that is, what really frustrates me is that I think, you know, today, if somebody goes into a vet and or even just phones the vet to book a routine neuter because that's what they've always done, and it's carried out without the proper information being passed on, that's tragic, because the information is now actually available. And today it's quite easy. If you have an animal that develops a cancer, the owner only has to Google for 5 minutes to find out that the risk of that cancer may have been quadrupled purely because the animal was neutered. And if they were not informed about that, 5 years ago even, I think that's fair enough. Most of us didn't know. But today, we need to get the information out there because now it is available to us. But I think it is an important point that we can't blame ourselves or our vets or anybody for what we did years ago when we didn't know any better. But we really must change now that we know better.
That's right.
Well, what's ironic for me is I actually ran a spay neuter assistance program for 7 years, where we helped low-income families get their animals spayed or neutered. And when I was still part of the organization when I took this job and started reading all of this, and I'm like, I can't be on the board anymore. I don't believe in this now. And I literally didn't get a reply from the board member. They just didn't even say, okay, thank you for your service, nothing. So it is that same feeling like, okay, I just caused all this harm and it's hard to admit, but we know now. So let's stop doing this.
Exactly. I mean, that's such a good example.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I think for most of us, it's hard not to get a little bit emotional about that, because
absolutely,
I've neutered dogs. Most people that you talk to have had dogs that were neutered in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And if those dogs suffered from any of those illnesses, and the list is very, very long, that may have come as a consequence of neutering, it stings. But we didn't know any better. And everything we did with the very best, caring and loving intentions. The point is, we can do better now because we know better now.
Can you talk briefly about which situations or health conditions a dog owner might face where neutering is necessary, and then perhaps what alternatives they might have?
I think they are very, very few, actually. I think the starting point has got to be that being healthy, being intact is healthy. And you have to have a very good reason to neuter, if that's going to be what you want to do. It could be a testicular cancer. It could be vets debate whether or not you should neuter dogs with mammary cancer. Some forms of mammary cancer, it's the same as in humans, actually. Some forms of breast cancer are influenced by the female sex hormones. So there is a debate whether or not you should neuter if you have a breast cancer. That's still being debated. And I heard a specialist in this field recently say that even if that is the case, she still wouldn't neuter, because she think the other side effects are too detrimental overall to that dog's health, which I thought was really interesting. You may have dogs with epilepsy or dogs with diabetes or conditions like that, where if their health problem is clearly worsens around their seasons, that could be an argument. I'm certainly not saying any dog with diabetes or any dog with epilepsy should be neutered, but if you have a dog that gets clusters of seizures when they're in season, for example, which is something we tend to see, so there can be specific health reasons.
I think one of the things people get drummed into their head is pyometra.
Yes. Pyometra is an infection of the womb, and it's one of the things that can happen if you're a dog and you have a womb. It used to be, the two for a female dog, the list of diseases that are more likely to happen in a neutered dog is incredibly long. There are two diseases on the list of things that are less likely to happen if you're neutered, and they are mammary cancer. Maybe it's being discussed. The jury's out on that one. And pyometra. You're obviously not going to get a womb infection if you don't have a womb.
Right.
So that's the one that I think, living in Scandinavia, I see that all the time as a vet, and it's something that it's a risk that we live with, and it's something that everybody who owns a female dog is aware of what to look out for, and it's very treatable. Not that long ago, it was regarded as more severe, and it tended to mean that you had to do a hysterectomy, and often you had to do an emergency hysterectomy. You needed to get that womb out quickly. These days, it's generally treated with you can treat it with drugs, so you don't tend to have to operate. Okay. So I see lots and lots of dogs with pyometras. You can say both mammary cancer, breast cancer, and pyometra, the womb infection, are diseases that have a high morbidity but a low mortality, meaning that they happen very frequently, but they're generally not very dangerous. And when I say that, lots of people will say, oh, but I had a dog that died of pyometra. Obviously, pyometra has to be taken seriously and it has to be treated. But most of those, I had a dog that died of pyometra and it was horrible, are 5, 10, 15 years ago, where it was where we didn't have the ways of treating that we do today.
Right.
It is something that is seen on a regular basis in a clinic that sees lots of entire dogs, and it's generally not something that they die from.
Good.
So it's a matter of being aware. What are the signs? What are the signs of breast cancer? What are the signs of pyometra if you have an intact female dogs?
Right.
These two issues, like I said, they have a high morbidity but a low mortality. But a lot of the diseases, all the cancer forms that happen more in neutered dogs are things like hemangiosarcomas, which are really where the diagnosis is a death sentence,
Right.
and where the risk of developing the problem can be 4 or 5 times higher if you're neutered. So overall, it's not difficult weighing up the pros and cons. Let me put it that way. It's more the veterinary science. The facts are pretty clear. I think the hurdle is the cultural biases, the habituation. And certainly when I talk about this, which I've done a lot recently, just because I think we really, everybody who cares about dogs, we need to help each other get this information out there. It's so heartbreaking when someone has a sick animal diagnosed with a cancer that probably came from neutering, and they were neutered 2 years ago, and the information was available to 2 years ago, and they didn't know. That's what breaks my heart. Not what we did, like you said, 5 years ago or whatever, before we knew. So I really think it's on all of us to talk about this and spread the word. I think I lost my thread. I do that. I go out on a tangent. I was saying something else.
No, but what about the dogs that we get that have already been spayed or neutered? How can we support those? Because we weren't given that choice, but we have a dog that's now without their hormones. I
mean, there are obviously lots of things we can do, diet being one of them, to try and keep our animals as healthy as we can. The issue is, if I should can I just spend 2 minutes talking about what is the issue with these animals? Why do they get ill? It's all blah, blah, blah. Let me start in one place and go from there. Obviously, sex hormones, testosterone in males, estrogen and progesterone in females, are produced in the internal sex organs, the gonads, the testicles in the males, the ovaries in the female. When we neuter, which we tend to do surgically, we remove the sex organs. So we remove the testicles in the male, we remove the ovaries in the females. Sometime in females in Europe, I think it's more common to remove just the ovaries. Sometimes it's just the ovaries, sometimes it's the ovaries and the uterus. It really makes no difference. As if the ovaries are gone, the animal is neutered. When that happens, we take away the ability to produce sex hormones. In an entire individual, the sex hormones, the sex hormone level is controlled through what we call the hypothalamus pituitary gonad axis, which just means that there's a feedback loop between the brain and the gonads that makes sure that we have the right level of sex hormone in the body. And the way that works is the pituitary gland produces and releases a hormone called luteinizing hormone, or LH. And LH tells the gonads to produce sex hormones. And that is then, a balance is maintained through this negative feedback, that when the level of sex hormone is sufficient, the pituitary gland turns down LH, and that's how we get homeostasis or a balance in the body. When we then surgically remove the sex organs, the pituitary gland keeps producing LH, because it keeps seeing there are low levels of sex hormones here, and it keeps asking the gonads to produce more sex hormones. But of course they can't, because they're gone. So we get this ever increasing, the pituitary gland produces more and more and more and more LH, sort of knocking on the door of the gonads, and no one's going to answer because the gonads are gone. And that's the root of the problem. It turns out that there are LH receptors all over the body. There's LH receptors in the skin, in the hair follicles, in the bladder, in white blood cells. And And all of these receptors are then suddenly experiencing abnormally high LH levels. And scientists have measured LH levels up to 30 times higher than they would ever be in a normal intact individual. So what this means is that, you know, this system, this feedback system between the hormones from the brain and the hormones from the gonads, it's not just about reproduction. It affects the whole body. And suddenly the whole body is bathed in LH. And that's what causes the problem. That's what gives, you know, makes the ligaments more lax than they should be, makes bladder cells grow uncontrollably and develop cancer, makes the lymph you know, you develop lymphoma because it's all this, is this constant bombarding with LH. And once you've removed the gonads, you've got crazy high LH levels forever. And that's the root of the problem. And that is fairly new information, which I certainly never heard of this just a few years ago. There are experimental treatments. I think they're still experimental treatments to give drugs that lower LH. But I mean, I'm getting out of my depth if I think in another couple of years we'll have a lot more information about that. But there was a very long answer to your very short question, what can we do about it?
Right.
And in a sense, once we've taken away the gonads, the imbalance is there. And we're only just beginning to look at what we can do about that. But that's the root of the problem. That's why you get the lax ligaments that cause the cruciate ruptures and the osteoarthritis, and that's why you get the cancers, and that's why you get all the problems that we get, the thyroid problems, etc., because of these LH receptors in tissues everywhere that are being bombarded with these very, very high levels of LH.
Something that we often see are dogs that are overweight. We recently, for medical reasons, had to neuter our male, who was a large breed, 8 years old, really hadn't had any health issues until recently. And since we neutered him, he is insatiable. He was never a food beggar. You know, oftentimes he would self-regulate and fast himself. And now all of a sudden it's, I'm hungry all the time.
Yeah.
Give me something. And I think when you talk about removing those sex hormones and the reproductive organs, you're literally removing their ability to regulate some of the feelings that they're having, which is, I'm hungry.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much more to learn about this. And I mean, this is what I mean about these, you know, these exciting times that in another couple of years, we'll know much more than we do today. But there are also LH receptors in the brain. And there are LH receptors in the parts of the brain to do with fear and aggression and, you know, all these, it's primal stuff. And we are messing with it, and we have not been aware of the consequences.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to open up our viewers to ask any questions they might have about this topic. This is just, it's a big topic and very fascinating.
You could talk forever.
Yes,
exactly. And we're over 30 minutes in, and I'm can we stay on another hour? So please, if anyone that is here and viewing and has been part of this really fascinating topic, please drop your questions in so we can have Dr. Hansen answer them. I am curious, you know, now you have your own practice. I'm sure that you have been in contact with other colleagues who are recommending spay and neuter. What are those conversations like for you?
I don't think it's a matter of differing opinions. I think it's a matter of, have you heard this yet? You know, I was in a discussion not very long ago. I call it a discussion. I was in a heated discussion a while ago because I sort of, with colleagues who just hadn't heard, you know, and were saying, you know, is neutering supposed to cause cancer now? And I said, well, yes. And I'll send you a link to 20 articles. And you know, it's, people just haven't heard. I don't think it's a matter of differing opinions, and I don't think there's anyone to blame really, because it's just that we didn't used to know this, and it is still relatively new, and it is just the case, even though it frustrates me a lot, that there is always a period, there's a lag, there's a period from a new scientific discovery until that is what is implemented in general practice everywhere. And the reason we're sitting here now is just to try and speed that up as much as we can, because that will literally save lives. But it is inevitable, I think. The word needs to get around, and everybody needs to have time to catch up with the science. But I can certainly tell you that this is very much an ongoing debate in veterinary circles at the moment. And things are changing, for sure.
What about alternatives like ovarian sparing spay and vasectomies?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's important to talk about as well. There are, I think in Scandinavia, they are less, in areas where people are generally comfortable having entire dogs, I don't think they're that relevant. Ovary sparing space and vasectomies are surgeries that make your dogs no longer fertile, but allow them to maintain normal hormonal status. So it can give a sense of, in a sense, they have been done. They're no longer fertile. So I think it's mostly going to be a halfway point, so to speak, a compromise where you are, where the idea of having an entire dog is challenging still. That you will, if they've had a vasectomy or if they've had an ovary sparing spay, then, well, obviously population control has been taken care of. I don't recommend them routinely because I think that they can give a false sense of security. It doesn't mean if your male dog has had a vasectomy or your female dog has had the uterus removed, she will still come on heat, and he will still smell her, and they will still want to mate, and that's not something that you can allow to happen unsupervised. So I don't think it's going to make it particularly easier well, I don't think it's going to make anything easier, really. I think it's more in the minds of humans that it's obviously a better thing to do. I mean, all the side effects of neutering have to do with the lack of hormones, and the hormones are going to be intact. But it doesn't mean that you can just disregard and let them loose, because they can get into fights, they can hurt themselves, all sorts of things can happen if you just let them at it, so to speak. So they have a place, I'm sure.
There was another question here that I thought was really good, and I think this goes off of what Kay was asking earlier. If our dog is spayed, what can or should we do to keep them healthy as they age?
I think that the answer, I mean, you can't, in terms of reducing the high levels of LH in the body, I think that's something that I'll be able to answer better in a couple of years. There's no simple way to do that now. But all the things that you can do is all the things that we can do for any dog to keep them healthy as they age. Feed them a proper diet, be careful about the way we use vaccines, careful about the way we use anti-parasitic treatments. Just give them a healthy lifestyle. And also, again, just try not to, we can't blame ourselves. There's nothing worse than it's done. If it's done, it's done. And we acted on the information that was available to us. Try to do everything else as well as possible. And don't blame yourself, is all I would say.
I think by proper diet, everyone in this room advocates for fresh food. Are there any particular supplements or things to add in that you think can be beneficial?
I don't think so. I have seen people suggest, I don't think so. No, I mean, I don't think there's anything I don't think there's anything you can do particularly differently for a dog because it's been neutered. I think you need to look at the health, try to give them as healthy a lifestyle as possible. And if they have symptoms of any kind, then you address those. But I think what you're asking, is there a kind of blanket recommendation, something that you should do for all neutered dogs? I don't think so. No, I'm a great one for individual treatments. And I think that if problems arise, then you should look at that particular individual and their particular problems and try to address them. So apart from, a really healthy lifestyle, there's no blanket recommendations that I would give to neutered dogs.
Yep, I agree. I love that. And I think there's a lot to be said for empowering the pet owner to look at the dog in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a large breed dog. Forever, I have gone out of my way to support his joints because I know later down the line that's going to be a problem. I also know that from his family. He's comes from a line of working dogs who have suffered from some of these things, and I can prevent or do what I can, be proactive, so that he doesn't face those issues in the future. A lot of people don't have that background or information, right? They get the dog already from a rescue or a shelter, and they're already neutered. So I think really spending the time to get to know the dog in front of you and not just going off of the internet and saying, I've got a German Shepherd with a sensitive stomach or whatever it is.
Yeah. Is this where I can mention my book? Because
yes, please do.
Absolutely.
I did write this book, The Complete Book of Cat and Dog Health, that goes through what I think you can do to try and keep your dog healthy,
Nice.
And it deals with these lifestyle choices.
Could you hold it up one more time? Our audience is going to love this.
There you go.
Yes. And I have a copy of this book myself. I will say that it is one of the easier to understand books out there. I think a lot of dog owners who are sort of on the precipice of starting a more holistic journey, a fresh food journey or more natural approaches to caring for their dog are often intimidated by so much information. And some of these books are, either geared to the very beginner or it's geared to someone who has been already researching different ways to practice holistic. And your book, I have to say, is it's just so easy to understand. It makes it easier to have that conversation with your veterinarian as well, because you're like, okay, simple way to ask this question. And now I can ask my vet, okay, is this a good step for me to take? Or what are your thoughts on it? And I think it also puts it in a way that inspires other veterinarians that we are seeing in person to go back into some of the research that you have already done. Bravo. Really, really great.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that. I mean, I'm a great one for common sense, and I think a lot of this is common sense, but you just don't think about it until you think about it, and you suddenly think, why did I never question this before?
That's me every day the last 2 years.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the book. For those of you that are here on our live, we are going to be doing a giveaway with Dr. Hansen that involves a copy of her book, The Complete Book of Cat and Dog Health, and a Feed Real DIY dog food workshop together. So keep a lookout for that in the coming days. It is going to be a giveaway posted here on Facebook. That will be very, very easy for you all to enter and hopefully win a copy of her book. I wanted to bring up this last question before we wrap up. Is the LH lower in a dog that's been castrated at an older age, such as 9 for a Labrador?
I think I have to say there's a lot of stuff we don't know yet, and that's probably one of them. The age, just to sum up really, what we know about neutering, clearly we know now that a lot of there's a lot of side effects, there's a lot of risks that mean that as a sort of go-to routine option, that's a practice that should end. That the end, we have seen the beginning of the end of that. But there are things that we don't understand properly yet. The two main ones are there are breed differences. It seems to be some breeds suffer more from neutering than others, and we certainly don't understand the whole story of what that's all about yet. And also the other one is the age at which neutering happens. We just don't quite know yet, but the research is ongoing. So if I can answer that question in a couple of years, I'll be very happy to. But at the moment, I don't think anybody knows. I think if you're going to do it later, intuitively, later must be better. But that's intuition. I'd rather talk on the basis of, documented research, and it's not there yet.
Yeah.
For some of those studies that you mentioned, where we now know more, can the average dog owner find that? Is it available to the public?
There's a list. There's a whole chapter in my book dedicated to this topic, and there's a list of references at the end of it.
Nice.
Generally speaking, reading scientific articles is, I don't know. I mean, if anybody wants to, they're available. Most of them are available online. But there's a list of references at the back of my book, and it's ever growing. I mean, it's certainly an area where lots of articles are published all the time. I attended a seminar on this just this summer, and the professor who was talking about this said just this year there's been 3 articles published on ovary sparing space and vasectomies in dogs. This will be the way forward.
Where was that session? Curious.
It
was not in America.
Yes, well, there's a professor at Oregon State University, Michelle Kuchler, who is one of the leading experts in this field, really, and who is teaching these procedures and who is doing lots of research in this field. Certainly someone to follow. Yes. Yep.
Well, truth be told, that's why we have Kay on our team, so she can go through and read all those studies and tell me what they say.
Yeah. I'll send you a very, very long list. There's loads of information, and there's loads coming out all the time. We can help each other find them and stay up to date for sure.
Where can we send veterinarians? Because I think that's a slightly different conversation. Go ahead.
No, well, I think the sort of veterinary journals are already deeply engaged with this conversation. The topic is, the conversation has started and it is ongoing. I think a list of references is a really good idea. But I mean, the reason I hesitate is that there's probably going to be an instance where I'm wrong, but I would almost dare to say that I think whatever advice someone was given 3 years ago or 5 years ago, changes happen so fast in this field that I would like to think that anybody taking a puppy to a vet today and say, should I neuter, that the vet will at least say, well, there's new information,
Right.
I just because someone was told something 2 years ago is a long time ago when we're talking about neutering. And I think that most people taking their puppy to the vet now will not be given a one-sided recommendation to neuter. I really hope not. And I don't think so.
Yep.
When you said that about giving them a reference list, one of the things that we took the time to do is made a reference list on Feed Real about real food, why you should feed it, kind of debunking. So maybe something like that. So what I did is I summarized each of the articles and then gave them the link. So, I mean, we have 20 articles on there probably, but it makes it easier because, like you said, most people don't want to sit and read those articles. So I read through them and summarized them and then put the link to the article if that strikes their fancy. So maybe that's something that we can look into doing.
I'll send you lots of links, lots of articles, because it's out there. It's a very hot topic and the information is out there. It's just that we need to get used to doing things differently.
Right.
And it's just, I don't know what it is, but we are all, I think if you've heard something all your life and suddenly you're being told, the earth is flat, anyone can see it's flat, and suddenly someone comes and tells you it's not. The instinct is to say, hang on, I don't believe you. I've heard different all my life. That can't be right.
Yeah.
But it's just new information. And we all need to allow ourselves, a breath to take it in, readjust, read up. But then we really need to start to do better.
Absolutely.
Well, I have to say, I'm very thankful for veterinarians like you who are courageous enough to stand up and go against the norm. We do our part by taking your message, making it a little bit easier for dog owners to understand and empowering them to ask these questions. But if you weren't out here, giving us opportunity and giving us all of this new information, even though it's there, nobody's really talking about it. Then I don't think
that's what we've got to talk about it. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
And obviously vets
Go
going to
nuts.
talk about it, and vets are talking about it, but also dog people talk to each other. You know,
Yes.
conversations happen in dog parks or wherever you are, and we really all need to talk about this, you know.
Yes.
Spread the word so that
Right.
everybody acts, all the decisions that everybody makes for their dogs are made on an informed, informed decisions. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's right. Thank you so much for being on our
It's a
live today,
pleasure.
Dr. Hansen.
Thank you for having me.
We hope to have you back again to talk about another topic in your book. Everyone that has joined our live, thanks again for joining and sending in your questions. Keep a lookout for that giveaway later this week for Dr. Hansen's book and the Feed Real DIY workshop. We are going to be posting that very soon. And if you have any other questions, feel free to comment them below and we'll make sure we do another pass through to get to them. Thank you, guys.
Hey.